Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our weekly Conversations on the Serial podcast. I'm Pete Rohrbaugh from Southern Polytechnic State University, and I'm in Marietta, Georgia. And this is our 7th consecutive week of talking about the meta-narrative aspects of Serial. And as always, Rabia is with me and a special guest. So why don't you guys take a chance to say hello and maybe Rabia to introduce Chris if you could.
Hi. Again, Pete, thanks for having me, and hello to everybody else, and I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Actually, has it been longer than Thanksgiving? Maybe it has, but to me, time is, it doesn't even matter anymore. But anyway, so I wanted to, I'm really excited that we have a guest with us today. It was totally unplanned. It just kind of happened, but it's great. His name, this is Chris Flohr, and Chris was one of Adnan's original attorneys when he was first arrested. And then I'll let Chris tell a little bit more about his connection to the case and introduce himself.
Sure. I appreciate being here today. I was involved in the case along with another colleague of mine, Professor Doug Colbert. We were Adnan's original attorneys, and it was a real privilege to serve him during the time that we did.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking time to join us, Chris. And Rabia, as we talked about before we went on, we'll probably kind of hold off on the kind of discussion that you and I usually have until Chris leaves, because he has some limited time, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So, Chris, I've gotten a little bit of background from Rabia on the conversations that you guys have had, and maybe it would be good to just start with you giving everybody a little bit of a background about how it was that you came to be working on Adnan's case in the beginning, and what that experience was like, and how it transitioned into the case for Cristina Gutierrez.
Sure. I had just moved. I was a public defender in New York for about 8 years. I just moved to Maryland at the time that Adnan had gotten charged. I was probably only in state a couple of months. And then Doug Colbert, the professor at University of Maryland Law School, got hired on the case. I was working with him on a grant-funded project at the time to reform the law on getting counsel at the bail review hearings. And I came in to the case with him, met Adnan, felt immediately that this was a kid that was ensnared in a system and in a mess that just didn't seem to make sense. Believed in his innocence from day one, and even with all the things that I've learned as I wasn't part of the trial, I was around during that time, but on a very tangential part. And a real tough thing, and I touched on this in the interviews that I've had for the podcast for Serial, that it was a really difficult thing to have encouraged Adnan's family to hire Tina, and to know how things started to have so many problems, many of them that I'm still learning, unfortunately. But it was important for me to get out the word that at the time that we had recommended the family to hire, and of course they did their due diligence and checked a lot of different lawyers to see who was going to be the best person to represent him. She was really a giant in the legal community. She was a phenomenal lawyer. And to watch her get disbarred and to see her slip away was just a really, really painful thing. But it would be a real travesty now if what it appears to be, not having been inside the defense camp at the time, that her health affected her during her second trial, that if that cost Adnan a fair shake in front of the system, then that just can't be tolerated. And it is my hope that that through the different appeals that have been filed, through the work that different folks are doing now, that he can finally be exonerated, which is, I think, what's going to ultimately happen here.
Really, that's you feel like that's a direction that that the system is moving towards?
I think that it's a bit of a bold statement, but I suppose it's more of, I have such a strong hope. My reaction to hearing Adnan's voice for the first time in 15 years when I listened to the episode 1, because I had written him, but I hadn't really had any other contact with him after the trials happened. I was just so saddened because I could hear how this young kid who was in a magnet school had been shaped so much by the jail system and the prison system, because he had a street tone to his voice that he simply did not have when I met him. And I know that that's impossible for him not to pick up, because that's who he's doing his time with. And it would really sadden me to know that whatever happens in this case, that he's irreparably changed by it. And I'm still marveling at the positive attitude that he has taken through this. And I think sometimes it might get a little confusing for the listeners of hearing his interviews to think, well, everything went okay, I'm okay, and it's not. I mean, to the impact that this has had on his family, the impact that it's had on so many people. I mean, I could remember this was the only case in my 24 years experience that I actually was physically present when they searched Adnan's house. And the way that the family was treated, I mean, we were corralled in a corner, told that we could not leave the house. I was able to give no input into what was going on, couldn't see the warrant, and it was just really shameful. I mean, these people had, even if for some reason you believe Adnan had something to do with this, his family had absolutely nothing to do with it. And to see that family and how they were impacted that day, Adnan had already been in custody at the time. It just was wrong. And I understand it. When people think that somebody did something bad, they feel like the ends justify the means. They look at him as a killer. So, and his family is the family of a killer. But I've never seen that. And even with all that I've heard and all the work that's been done since then by many, many people now, I still feel in my heart of hearts that Adnan did not do this. I just don't believe that he did it.
Chris, maybe you could talk about how it was. I'm going to kind of put two questions to what you just said. One is, when you met with him initially and said that you had this sense or this kind of like conviction that he was innocent, what was it that made you feel that way? How did you come about having that feeling?
I think part of it was just intuitive in meeting him, but I'm criminal defense lawyer, so I know to be able that you got to go beyond that. Like, you can't just tell a judge or a jury that you feel it in your heart of hearts. It's not going to cut it. But knowing the layout of here, now that this story has caught so much attention around the world, that the layout of where things are said to have happened just simply doesn't make sense. That even a dumb teenager is not going to start showing bodies of dead people in public places where there's a busy street in front of it. There was so many things that just made no sense. And I think one of the things that Sarah did a good job of bringing out was when she talked to Adnan's friends, they described him as a player. Adnan was a good-looking, in good physical shape athlete at the time. So to paint him as this person who was just so broken up over Hayes' breakup that he couldn't go on and so forth, couldn't have anybody else, that just wasn't factually true. And I think that another thing that Sarah did a really good job of hitting the nail on the head is that those of us that do this work know that it's very easy that once one side, be it the defense or the prosecutor, wants things to go in a certain way, she referred to it as the currency of spin. And whether the case has, it is factually backed or not, if you could take some of those facts and put it in a certain way to be able to make your side win, everybody believes that the prosecutors, the ones that march in with the white hat, and they'll only do justice. In fact, that's their charge under the ethics. But in this case, to think that a prosecutor outright lied about what was going on just at the bail stage, not talking about the trial stage, and then later apologized for inadvertently misleading the court, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. And the other thing I think is important, especially based on the episode 10, because I imagine most of the people that are watching you are current, is that the fact that Adnan's lawyers are seeking to brief an issue about whether he would have gotten a plea is completely not inconsistent with his innocence. Because what hasn't been talked about yet in the podcast is that you can take a plea of no contest, you can take a plea called an Alford plea, which is a way of being able to enter a guilty plea. And in that case, in the Alford case, North Carolina versus Alford, it was a Supreme Court case where the person was facing death. And because they didn't want to face the death penalty, even though they maintained their innocence all the way through, they decided to take a guilty plea and get a 30-year sentence. That man literally saved his life by being able to take that plea. And the court recognized that if someone wants to save themselves from the possibility of a more severe sentence, in that case death, they have the ability to enter that plea. There's many judges in my experience that are very reluctant to take them, but as far as being able to have that option, and if Adnan had directed his counsel to say, look, I want to be able to explore this to see if I can get back to my family, it's a very common dynamic. And if things were wrong in the defense camp, which I was not inside, so I don't know, and I'm not handling the post-conviction, but that is something that's really important. And it's important for the people at large to say, oh, well, if he was going to take a guilty plea, then he must have had to admit that he did this. The only thing different between an Alford plea and a regular guilty plea is it omits the part of the plea litany, or the questions that get asked about whether you're pleading guilty because you're in fact guilty. In fact, many times when I've taken Alford pleas in my career, the judge is so used to saying those words that you have to correct them and stop them and say, Judge, this isn't a regular guilty plea, this is an Alford, and the prosecutors agreed to it. Now, I don't know if that would have happened, but the thing is that if he directed his counsel to ask for it and the prosecution says it never was done, that's a serious issue. And I certainly hope that our court takes it seriously, because the thought of the humanness and how easily things can go wrong in the system frightens me. And one of the things that I was thinking about after I pondered that episode this week is many people think and want to believe that our system would never make a mistake like that. We all want to be able to hold on to that, especially for those of us that are on the front lines that are part of it, which I am. But one of the things I thought to myself is that if those people that are going to hear that appeal, and anybody that's considering about whether to grant Adnan relief, you have to go beyond just being able to say, well, yes, theoretically people get found guilty or are sentenced to something that they didn't do. I've had the fortune and also difficulty of having met people that were exonerated after they were wrongfully imprisoned. When I met Reuben Hurricane Carter, when he spoke, I was moved. But I can tell you one thing that just brings it home to me about how real this is. Reuben Hurricane Carter, the famous case that was profiled in the movie with Denzel Washington, his co-defendant was John Artis. John Artis was a young kid at the time. And they tell the story in that case that he had the opportunity to be let go. They took him out of the jail, brought him to his family at Christmas time, and said, all you have to do is give us the hurricane. That's who we want, and we'll cut you loose. And he said, no, I won't do that. Well, I shook John Artis's hand. John Artis has nubs where his fingers used to be on his right hand, 3 of them that were missing, because he got a basic infection that was not treated in jail. That man sat in jail for all those years, 2 trials, they were both found guilty, and that man is irreparably damaged. Our system did that. I know enough to know that you have to have a real certainty. That's why the standard from the forefathers is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Not just, I think he did it, or he probably did it, or, the jilted boyfriend must be the most likely. There has to be something more than that. And to know that there's so many holes in this case and so many weaknesses, and to think that at some point, what are we going to do to repair a kid that's given the best years of his life to a prison system? Really, this is the prime of his life, and if they got it wrong, which I believe they did, it's really hard to be able to fathom. So my plea to those that are handling the decision making here is that there's a very, very likely chance that they've got the wrong guy here. And if they do, then we really have to apply such a standard that we can't allow that to happen. And I know that we want to believe it can't happen, but it does. And look at the Innocence Project. How many people that were facing death, that were going to be executed, have been exonerated? And perhaps at some point here, with some of the evidence that wasn't tested, that might be part of the way to get him out. But the reason why, and I think I'll close with this because I know you've got lots of stuff to cover and so forth. The reason why Sarah came to me is that I had written a letter to Adnan because after all the years that he was sitting in jail, it was probably about 8-10 years at the time, I had seen a documentary on new technology that would allow this scientist to look inside someone's brain to see if the memory of the crime was in there, and if there was basically an empty space. I'm not a scientist, so I'm summarizing it. Then I thought that that might help his case, because it was a difficult case to be able to say, okay, we can show conclusively he didn't do that. It's a very difficult thing to prove your innocence. That's why our system is supposed to not require us to prove our innocence. It's supposed to be the other way around. But I wrote him that letter when he was in jail, and I said, perhaps your defense team might be able to use this, and maybe somehow this will finally be able to show that you didn't do this, because that's what I felt.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for all that that background. It's helpful. I guess one more, I know that you've got to leave in a minute, one more question before you go, touching on some points that Robbie and I have talked about for the last several weeks. When you were looking at, when you were preparing for Adnan's defense, were you able to understand the timeline that the prosecution was putting together, and in a sense the narrative of where Jay and Adnan were throughout that whole day that obviously the podcast is meditated on and crunched over a whole bunch? Were you able to kind of see that timeline that they were building, or is that something that you felt like developed and got more solid after you were not involved in the case anymore?
The bail stage is a real preliminary stage, and in this state, you're not entitled to discovery before that. So we would have a charging document, the investigation that we did on our own, and informal discovery that we would get here and there. But excuse me, we really had no idea about so many of the facts. And because I was not involved with the trials, for the first time that I learned, because I haven't had the benefit of the files and so forth like Rabia has, that to hear that the prosecutor got a lawyer for their own witness. I mean, as Sarah said, if you're a lawyer or a judge right now, your jaw's dropped, because that just doesn't happen. I mean, I've practiced in multiple jurisdictions now, and I have never, ever heard of a prosecutor in a state court case going out to get a private attorney for their own witness. I mean, it was really shocking. And what also just baffles my mind, and not knowing what happened on the appellate part of this case, is how could that not be? I know Judge Hurd. She had the second trial, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. I think she's a really caring judge. But it's really hard for me to understand legally how she could say, because Jay didn't appreciate the fact that he was getting this benefit, that somehow it was no harm, no foul, is the way I understand it was put out there. I mean, that's a major issue, and what we have is in federal cases now and state cases about the issue of not giving someone their Brady material and not giving them evidence that would support their innocence or that could question the witnesses, and to be able to know that that could have impacted. And the thing to know is that I understand that people sort of listen to little snippets of the cross-examination and think, well, it's like, you're kind of making it up as you go. Well, that's not the way any experienced trial lawyer does the case. So while people may be able to critique our cross-examination, that preparation starts way, way before you actually get up to cross-examine the witness. So to not have that ahead of time, it will change your order, it will change the type of questions that you have, and to find that out, I don't know how many days into the 5-day cross she was when she found that out for the first time, but that's just really outrageous that they did not turn that information over. And there's no way a prosecutor can defend and say, I got this person a lawyer, but I'm not going to turn that over because I don't see that as giving them a benefit. How could that not be a benefit? It's really, really outrageous. So I appreciate being invited. I appreciate sitting here with Rabia, and I appreciate you guys. And I really think that it's heartwarming to see that so many people have now been interested in this case. And not everybody agrees with me. I get that, and I encourage people to have a robust discussion about it. But I really hope that we look at this and say, just because a crime happened doesn't mean we have to imprison somebody. It doesn't always go that way. Some crimes go unsolved. And if we've got the wrong guy in there, and we've had him sitting in there for such a long time, let's do something about it. Let's get out there and make a decision and have people's voices heard. If those are the people that agree with me out there, they have every right to be able to write judges, to write the defense team and say, we believe that this guy is innocent. We think that you're holding an innocent man who had nothing to do with this crime and had his life taken away from him. They say that, and the courts and judges respond. So thanks for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Chris, thank you for joining us. If people jumped in the middle of that, Chris Flohr was on Adnan's original defense team during the bail hearings. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And maybe Chris will be talking to you again soon. But we appreciate your bringing the experience that you had with the early part of the case to us, and hope that you have a good day.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, can I just add that, first of all, thank you so much, Chris, for doing this, because I literally just jumped him at the last minute and asked him to be part of it. But also that Chris is going to be working with me and others on the ground here to start some grassroots advocacy for Adnan. So he will hopefully remain engaged, and we'll continue to update you on the work we're doing.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks for being here.
I'll be in touch. I'll see you soon. All right, so let me just readjust. Okay. Okay.
I think probably people on Reddit are going to start writing about every different location that we do these hangouts
Well,
from.
this is still my office. It's just the other side of my office.
Oh, okay. Still.
Because I couldn't. I could certainly go back around and.
Yeah,
no. Okay. Yeah. No, but I thought that was some of his. I mean, you could tell how passionate he is, right? Mm-hmm. He is so like he has such conviction about Adnan's innocence and about making change happen. And I really appreciated his last comment that people can write. They can write to judges. They can write to the state. They can do things. And I think what I'll try to do is I'll get that information of where they could address certain letters and things, mm-hmm. and put it on my blog.
Mm-hmm. So. That would be a good place for us to start. Sarah mentioned in the most recent episode, kind of updated people, and these parts of Serial are kind of, I think, some of the most interesting ones to me, where you can tell that even in small ways, they're being responsive to the community who's listening to the story as they're building it. But she kind of updated people with the idea that, what's happening in January, and that there's, that the court, I guess, gave both sides until January. Is it January 15, or is it a different date?
Yeah, so Adnan's attorney has already filed the application. The state has until, I think, January 14th to respond. And then the judge, it can go different ways. I mean, there could be more. The court will kind of decide how it goes. They could require more briefing. They could, mm-hmm. do something about it at that point. They could have a hearing. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But there isn't an actual appeal yet.
Okay, so this is maybe like discovery or investigation to see whether.
This is a petition to be able to file an appeal. So whatever decision happens here, the court will decide, can Adnan get another appeal? That's really the issue. And the court, and actually I spoke to Justin today. Because he can explain it better than I can also. I mean, he's the attorney. I do have a little video of him explaining it, and I'll put that up on the blog later this week probably, so people can see exactly where we are procedurally with the case.
Okay. So, well, before I jump into some questions, do you have anything that you want to talk about that's come up in the last week or so? I usually come in with this list of kind of organic questions that we build off of, but given how things are pacing out right now, and it seems like there really is kind of an elevated volume to things, I wanted to see if you wanted to jump in with reflections or questions on how things are going for you, how you feel like the pacing of the podcast is moving, where you feel like it's getting ready to go.
I mean, I feel like it's the lull in between the two episodes, the 2-week lull, was kind of much needed. I mean, I really kind of feel I feel exhausted, and in a way, I'm very ready for the show to be over. Because just taking the time I have hundreds and hundreds of messages that I don't have time to respond to. I have, the interview request, but the blog, for me, like responding to to the podcast itself is really important. And then talking, I talked to Adnan twice last week, filling him on what happened, what didn't happen, what needs to happen, and then trying to come up with strategically a plan, like how do we, there's so many different things happening here where, I mentioned that Chris is going to be working with me on some grassroots efforts, and that's something that just I developed about a week or 10 days. I've been thinking about it for a while, having a fund, having some advocacy here. And I just about a week or 10 days ago, I crystallized it, how it would look and what it would mean and what we would do. So for the last week, I've been looking for the right people to be part of an advisory board for this. So, there's like a lot of things happening that that once the show is over, I can give more attention to and would be more impactful for Adnan's actual case. And at the same time, this episode 10 was maybe the first episode where I got a little bit upset about the episode, and that hasn't really happened in the past. I completely understand, Sarah's approach, and that she's a storyteller, and in many ways she's just telling her own story of discovery in this case. But I think this week I was a little hurt. I'm not hurt. I was upset. I was just upset.
Mm-hmm. And that's the direction that I wanted to go with some of the questions I prepared for today. But can you? Let me take a step back. So Sarah makes it clear in the episode, this is something that I believe Rabia believes differently. She made it very specific that that you two have a difference of opinion on this subject, and in kind of her very architectural way, she made the claim about how she disagreed with you that that Gutierrez threw the case on purpose, and then went on to kind of build, and that made, as a listener, that made me feel like, oh, she's actually going to stick up for Gutierrez and say that this wasn't really bungled. But then she goes on to prove that it absolutely was bungled, but provides a different narrative for why that would be, and goes into the whole illness kind of explanation, which I thought was interesting. She's slicing things up into little pieces and saying, Rabia and I disagree about this. The bigger picture is, was it bungled? Were there all kinds of problems with it? Yes, but the ultimate motivation of why those things happened, we differ on. And then on your blog, you kind of took her to task for that and said, how could you think that this person didn't do this on purpose? Here's this other fact. Here's this other fact. And I just, it's been clear throughout. Sorry, this is taking a long time.
That's okay.
It's been clear throughout that you have a tremendous amount of respect for Sarah, not just for her decision to make this case the featured element of the first season of Serial, but how well she's gone about doing her work. And it's never seemed, you've never been ambivalent about that, or you've never kind of equivocated on that. And this really is the first time where you're deciding, we really are at odds on this. And that's a complicated kind of position to sit with. Even at the end of your blog, you were saying, you're kind of trying to mitigate that and kind of put it in context and say, it's only on this one thing that we disagree. So can you talk about how complicated that is, and whether you've had a conversation with Sarah about that?
Yeah, so can I just back up just a little bit before I get to that?
Yep.
And explain kind of why I was upset at kind of how that portion of the episode, I was fine with the whole racial, I think she covered and uncovered the religious bias issue really well. And I completely agree with most of her conclusions on that. First of all, it was the fact that I was characterized as maybe I should go back and listen to it, but it seemed that I was kind of characterized as that this is kind of like my default position, that she threw the case on purpose. That wasn't my default position. My position was that I felt like maybe that was it. Maybe she did. It was just a reasonable maybe, that was in my head, like a suspicion. It wasn't that I was absolutely sure that she threw the case on purpose. in my position 15 years ago, when I looked at that, and even now, I mean, like, although nothing I've learned about Christina is new, I mean, I've known all these things all these years, including we've kept on top of, like, when the complaints were coming in, when she got disbarred. We all knew this. But the possibility, the way she interacted with the family, and the idea that the only thing she would talk about with us was money, or his family was money, and then I was present for at least 3 of those conversations. And his family had no, I mean, it was like they had no tie to her other than money. And then knowing that, look, she had partners who filed complaints against her, and so many other clients saying she took money. So she needed money. She definitely needed money. And somebody who was desperate enough to need money could potentially think, I could get money for an appeal too. What can I do to get an appeal? So I'm not saying I know for sure she threw it. I'm saying it's a reasonable, from my perspective, I felt like it was a reasonable possibility. Now, I'm not a trial lawyer, but I thought the trial was a disaster. I thought her defense was a disaster. So I think, that's one thing. But beyond that, I specifically was really just kind of amazed at one portion where Sarah says, she speaks to the Whitmans, and the Whitmans have been devastated in a way that I can't even fathom. I mean, that is one of the most devastating stories I've ever heard. It's so, I cried about it many times. It's really heartbreaking. And so you have Mr. Whitman saying that, she lied to us. She did. Christina lied. That was not her, that kind of blatant lie that somebody else is working on the brief for the Supreme Court, I don't think her illness explains that, right? I don't see how her illness could explain something like that. And for Sarah to come back and say, that's one explanation, but the charitable explanation here is that she didn't realize how sick she was, which is a non sequitur to me, because again, lying about a brief has nothing to do with not realizing how sick you are. That's just you've lying to your client, and you're giving them hope about something where work is actually not being done. That's straight up fraud, okay? And so I thought, I really was, I felt like saying to Sarah, you're not allowed to be charitable in this assessment, because it wasn't you that she lied to. It wasn't your son. It wasn't your, that's like me saying, well, I want to be, saying to the members of Eric Garner's family, I want to be charitable in my assessment of the officer who choked your husband to death. I can't. I think it's unconscionable for me to say that in the face of somebody who's had such tremendous pain because of this person. So that's what I was like, I get it, but if it was, God forbid, if it was Sarah's own loved one, son, brother, I don't think she could be so charitable. Mm-hmm. So, but anyhow, moving on from that, so when I read the blog immediately, I think I tweeted out once that I was upset. I was having a rough day anyways on Thursday. And that just really, I had a lot going on. I've been experiencing, it's interesting, some really, really terrible pain in my body, and I think it might be a stress reaction because some of my conversations. So, and I think it has to do with this whole thing, everything that's been going on for the last couple months. And so I was having a rough day. So when I read that I was upset, I tweeted out that I was upset, and then I stayed up all night Thursday night to write that blog. And Friday morning, I think I posted it, I don't remember, around 10, 11, and then I just fell asleep. I was exhausted because I had literally been up all night, and I fell asleep for a couple of hours, and when I woke up, I had a number of messages, from Sarah saying, why are you upset at me? And she hadn't read the blog, though, so then she went back and she read the blog, and she got it, and she said, okay, well, fair enough, she didn't take any exception to the point that I raised. And so, we talked about it. I mean, we texted back and forth about it. And, I do respect her, and I want her to know I respect her, and we can never, ever repay what she's done we can't. So it's not that, but, it was like a a slap in the face when she said that she was going to be charitable about that. So some things I understand. I know Christina was very, very ill. I know it impacted her work. It's clear because from every single person I've talked to, they said she was an amazing attorney. So it must have been a horrible time in her life. But you can't give passes to just lying to your clients. You can't give passes to somebody who has a whole legal team. And in their notes, it says Asia McClain saw Adnan at this time. And nobody, forget Christina, from the legal team even, I can't give passes for all of that. And yeah, so, yeah, I mean, Sarah is doing her thing. She's still interviewing people. And I talked to Adnan on Friday as well, and I told him about the podcast and about that portion of it, and he was also a little bit troubled by it. So I told him the best thing to do would be to just write me a letter, like about how he felt about Christina, the entire thing, because he said that it wasn't the entirety of his sentiments, and so he's going to do that, and I'll just put it on my blog. Mm-hmm. Did I answer your questions? I don't know.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
I think that the troubling thing about all of this, I mean, the troubling emotionally, but also problematic from kind of an analytical point of view, is that Sarah is trying to be objective. Sarah doesn't have. Like you're saying, Sarah didn't have someone close to her involved in this story, although people can make all kinds of arguments that, according to how the podcast has gone, that it's that she has in some ways gotten close to Adnan, or feels like she's gotten close to Adnan. But in all actuality, objectivity in this kind of a situation is nearly impossible to perform. And that objectivity really is, in some senses, a performance that we hold up as an ideal, and we say, the court gives us an objective view, or a journalistic account of things gives us an objective view. In fact, we're so stuck to our own subjectivity and to the fact that there's things that we can't see, and the narratives that we're constantly writing in our heads. That have to do with that don't have to do with this one instance, but have to do with everything else that's gone on in our lives, and the things that have put together our identities. So, yeah, I think certainly objectivity is it's like a phantom.
Yeah, I think we tend to think if a journalist is looking at something, or like you said, anybody that in a certain position, I don't know if there's any such thing as pure objectivity. I mean, Sarah's going to be subjective, but also I think Sarah has to be. If you'll notice, for example, when Sarah talks about like the detectives, right? She's very respectful. She tells you what people have done, but she doesn't draw conclusions all the time, right? She kind of lets you draw her conclusions. Whereas with Christina, she kind of did draw a conclusion on it, but in other places with like the detectives, she had a very respectful treatment of them. She's been, generally speaking, pretty respectful of the court and the prosecutors and things of that sort. And so I think, she doesn't want, and it doesn't mean that she doesn't have opinions on certain things, but I think that she wants mostly to let people draw their own opinions. And I felt like this episode was the one time where she decided she did want to say this is on this particular person, that this is my opinion, and that's fine. I mean, maybe that if that's her opinion, that's her opinion. But I just really think it wouldn't be her opinion if she was in the Whitman's shoes or our shoes.
And she has made very explicit, selective claims about her own opinions. That moment 2 episodes ago, where she said, "Can we just dispense with the fact that this really could ever happen? I have given up on the fact that this timeline works. I don't believe it anymore."
Yeah.
But she has to, according to the confines of what she's doing, she has to withhold that as long as she possibly can, so that the story, theoretically, so that the story tells itself, which, as we know, is impossible.
Yeah.
There are only events. There are no tellings until people get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really twisted up, complicated part of
And I
this.
think definitely, I mean, I think with Sarah and Adnan and Sarah and me and Sarah and anybody who is attached to this case, I mean, it's always going to be a complicated dance for her, whether it's Jay, whether it's anybody, right? I mean, like, she has to be able to maintain a relationship because she needs information to tell a story. She needs to be able to keep coming back. But at the same time, we all know that, there are going to be times when we're not happy with the story she's telling, or, Jay's not happy with the story she's telling, or whatever. Adnan's, I'm not happy. But you, to some extent, and she talked about this, I think, in one episode where she said she could tell that Adnan is thinking, this is what she's thinking, and so then I'm going to respond to what I think she's thinking. And that's kind of always in the background. I'll tell you a story. It was really funny, actually. So Sarah came to my house my parents' house a few weeks ago to do a follow-up interview, and my mother was there. And my mother is, you think I'm assertive. My mother likes to be up in everything. So, and my mom's very emotional about Adnan. She loves him. She's just, it's been so hard for her that she can't even bring herself to listen to the podcast. So Sarah walks in, and my mother's older, and I told my mom, this is Sarah Koenig, and she's been reporting on the case, and we're just going to do a follow-up interview, Mom. And so my mom said, oh, really? And so my mom immediately wanted to start talking about Adnan with her. And so my mom said, she was like, I knew him since he was like this and he was like this. And my mom pointed to a chair and said, Adnan was sitting in this chair when they found her body. And I'm like, no, that's not true, Mom. I was like, okay, Mom, listen, you're getting really emotional. He actually was not at our house when her body was found. And I said to my mom in Urdu, I said it in a different language because I didn't want to offend Sarah, but I was like, she's a reporter. She could write that down, and it's, Mom, you're not remembering that correctly. So we have to constantly maintain, I don't think Sarah would have done it. I think I could have been like, I'm sorry, Sarah, my mom's not quite remembering things correctly, but and Sarah would have ignored it. But you have to think about, like, you're wondering, how is she gonna tell what you're saying, and what parts of this is she gonna tell?
Yeah.
So it can be tricky.
Yeah, that's why I think that that's why I like our conversations every week, because it gives at least, it gives you the opportunity to hopefully to not be as contextualized, to basically provide the context yourself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Well, one thing that you mentioned at the end of one of your blog posts last week is that Sarah is going to be on the Colbert Report this week, right?
Oh, I think I tweeted it. I don't think I put it on a blog. Yeah. I think on this Wednesday evening she's going to be on Colbert, which is exciting. Yeah.
Which is in itself like one more really strange kind of narrative twist to this whole story, because how do you deal with a story like this on the Colbert Report? I mean, that's weird.
I mean, and because he's in a character, right? He's playing a character. I think he might have, and I don't know to what extent he wants to talk about the actual case, or he's just going to talk about this show itself. But I can imagine Colbert saying, well, he's a Muslim, so he must have done. I mean, I can imagine him, like, in that play role, riffing on that. That same night, though, I think a few members of Adnan's family are supposed to be on CNN. And but hopefully I'll be able to get home in time to see Sarah on Colbert. And I did congratulate her on that. And she's done tremendous work. They're already winning awards, and she's going to continue to do that, and she deserves it. And I think the fact that Colbert only has so many shows left because he's ending his show, and it's like Barack Obama and Sarah Koenig. I'm like, come on, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So I hope Adnan can see it. I don't know what he can watch and what he can't watch in prison, but I hope he can see it.
Do you know if he's still getting transcripts? And at one point you said that somebody was sending him transcripts of the show.
Yeah. So it was somebody on Reddit who, like, in the first few weeks was like, I'm sending, but I got off of Reddit, so I don't know I don't have an account there. But I just actually last week, in the middle of the week, sent him like the last 5 or 6 episodes of the transcripts. Then I sent him my blogs. I sent him Susan Simpson's blogs. I sent him there's a evidence professor who's writing his blogs. I sent him tweets. I sent him messages of support that we're getting. I made a huge packet and I sent it to him. And he got it, and he has been reading through it. So he's I think he's like it's just so weird for him. He just doesn't get it. Like he doesn't. I think it's really weird for him. And part of him worries about like what does this mean for my. I mean, most of him worries about what does this mean for my case, for the actual case. But sad in some ways. It might not mean anything for his case, all the publicity, and that's the thing. That's the reality, though.
Do you think that's possible, Rabia? Do you think it's possible that all of this means nothing to his case?
Honestly, anything's possible. After 15 years of just the most ridiculous things happening, like from Asia saying, I'm not coming to the hearing, to, I mean, anything's possible, but I think, I'm hopeful, and we're all hopeful that that's not the case. We're hopeful that, like Chris just said, that we're able to garner public support enough that, and, I think, what I've been told is that, the Special Court of Appeal, it's not like they're paying attention. Like, everybody's kind of on alert in the legal community down here. Mm-hmm. And so they are paying attention to what's happening in the show and the public response. And it might shape the outcome, but I just don't know. I don't know. Some of it might depend on internal politics. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But why not? It's a possibility. Why not?
Right. Where do you think we're going in these next 2 episodes, Rabia?
What I think are in the next 2 episodes? Well, the next one is called Rumors.
Right.
I know that. I kind of know what it's about, and it's actually related to some stuff that actually got started on Reddit, I think after the first 2 or 3 weeks. There are a couple of people on Reddit who were like, we want to remain anonymous, but we knew Adnan, and he's not the wonderful person that people say he is. And I understand they reached out to Sarah, and I'm assuming she's exploring that. She also asked me about those things when she came for her last interview. So, I mean, that's what I assume. And then, I don't know, she's got to do, if she has 12, I'm saying only, like it's only, but if they're going to 12 episodes, then I guess it has to be some kind of wrap-up. Mm-hmm. She can't, you can only keep going on and on with this. I mean, the legal stuff is going to go on for a while, right? And I think she'll go back and report on it. And so I guess it would have to be some kind of a wrap-up of maybe where she is. Actually, that would be the most interesting to me, is to know where she has ended up after a year and a half of this, and how she's going to engage with the story further, and is she going to walk away from this and from Adnan, or what is she going to do? I have my opinions about it, what I think is going to happen, but I would like to hear it from her.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, well, that's probably a good place for us to wrap up for today. I do kind of want to give anybody who's kind of making a habit of watching these the insight that that you and I have been talking back and forth a bunch throughout this process, like when we're not talking on Monday on camera, and that we're really interested in kind of continuing some kind of regular conversation after Serial, just because it seems like kind of a productive framework, and that work that we're doing that has nothing to do with the podcast is has some crossover. So that's something that I just wanted to let people who are following along know that might be something that we do after this is all over, which I'm looking forward to, because I've really appreciated the fact that you've committed to these meetings every week that are difficult, and I know from reading things that people write to you and to me and on Twitter and stuff like that the people really do appreciate the kind of human face that you're putting on this difficult part of your life.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I think that would be great. I'm totally interested in continuing. I mean, there's a lot of work you do and I do that has nothing to do with this case or this show that would be great to continue to explore together. I also know, I mean, we kind of touched on it, but it would be maybe after the show's over, maybe in the new year, some of our people who kind of regularly follow the conversations, maybe we could have them on and just by invitation and kind of do a discussion together with them afterwards. I think that would be great.
Yep, I agree. I look forward to putting that together as well. Okay, well, anybody who's followed along, we appreciate you joining us, and for people that listen up later in the week, we look forward to seeing all of you back next week at 1 p.m., barring any unforeseen strange things. And Rabia, thanks again, and I hope that everybody has a good week. We'll see you next week at 1 p.m.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye, Pete.
Bye.